The sound of her father's voice bartering her away like livestock would haunt Clara Bennett for the rest of her days, though she never imagined that humiliation would lead her to the greatest love she would ever know. "I'll take the mule, 50 pounds of flour, and we got ourselves a deal," her father said, his words slurred with whiskey as he leaned against the wooden post outside Murphy's General Store in Silver Creek, Montana Territory in the summer of 1876. Clara stood frozen on the dusty street, her worn calico dress clinging to her frame in the oppressive heat, unable to comprehend that her own flesh and blood was trading her to settle a gambling debt with Silas Crenshaw, a man whose reputation for cruelty preceded him like a foul wind. Silas grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth, and extended his weathered hand. Done. The girl's mine, then. He was a wiry man in his 50s, with eyes like a snake and hands that Clara knew would bring her nothing but misery. Her father shook on it without even glancing her way, without a moment's hesitation or remorse. 22 years of raising her, and this was how it ended. Clara's mother had died 3 years prior from fever, and without her gentle presence, her father had descended into gambling and drink. But she never thought it would come to this. Her hands trembled as Silas grabbed her elbow with fingers that dug into her skin like talons. "Let's go, girl. You got belongings to fetch?" His breath reeked of rot-gut whiskey and something worse. "I need to get my things," Clara managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She pulled away from his grasp and walked toward the ramshackle cabin she'd called home, her legs moving mechanically while her mind spun in desperate circles. There had to be a way out. There had to be. Inside the cabin, she gathered her meager possessions, a change of clothes, her mother's Bible, a tin cup, and the quilt her grandmother had stitched. Her hands moved quickly, stuffing everything into a canvas bag while her thoughts raced. She could run. But where? Silver Creek was surrounded by wilderness, and a woman alone wouldn't last long. She had no money, no horse, nowhere to go. The reality of her situation crashed over her like an icy wave. When she emerged, Silas was already leading the mule away while her father hoisted the bag of flour over his shoulder, finally meeting her eyes. For just a moment something flickered there, perhaps shame or regret, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "You'll be fine, Clara. Silas needs a wife to cook and clean. Better than starving here with me," her father muttered, but they both knew the words were hollow justification. "I'll never forgive you for this," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Never." He turned away without another word, disappearing into the saloon with his precious flour, and Clara felt the last thread connecting her to her former life snap cleanly in two. Silas's homestead was 7 miles north of town, a grueling walk under the Montana sun. He rode the new mule while Clara trudged behind, her feet blistering in her worn boots. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh way, rolling hills covered in prairie grass, distant mountains rising like sentinels against the blue sky. But Clara couldn't appreciate any of it, her mind consumed with the cage her life had become. The cabin came into view as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the valley. It was small and poorly maintained, with a sagging roof and gaps in the chinked logs. A lean-to stable stood nearby, and chickens pecked in a wire enclosure. This was to be her prison. "Get inside and fix supper. I'm hungry," Silas ordered, dismounting. "And don't get any ideas about running. Nearest town is Silver Creek, and everyone there knows you belong to me now. They will bring you right back." Clara entered the cabin, her stomach churning at the squalor. Dirty dishes were piled in a bucket, the floor was caked with mud, and the air smelled of stale tobacco and unwashed man. She set her bag down and surveyed what she had to work with. There was a cast-iron stove, some basic supplies, and a few bruised potatoes in a crate. She got to work, if only to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. As she cooked, Silas sat in a rickety chair, watching her with unsettling intensity. "You're a pretty thing, despite being too skinny. We'll get you fattened up. I paid good money for you, and I expect you to earn your keep." Clara said nothing, focusing on slicing the potatoes with a dull knife. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the best defense. Dinner was a tense affair. Silas ate like a starving animal, barely pausing between bites while Clara picked at her portion. Her appetite had vanished entirely. When he finished, he leaned back and studied her again. "There's only one bed, but don't worry. I am patient. We will make this official-like in a few days. We've got to get the preacher out here." He grinned at her discomfort. "Until then, you sleep on the floor." Relief flooded through her, even as she hated herself for feeling grateful for such a small mercy. She cleaned up the dishes in silence, scrubbing them with sand and cold water from the pump outside. The evening air was cooling, and she stood for a moment under the emerging stars, breathing deeply. Freedom felt like a dream she'd once had but could no longer quite remember. That night she lay on the hard floor wrapped in her grandmother's quilt, listening to Silas snore in the bed above. She stared at the rough-hewn ceiling and prayed for a miracle, though she'd stopped believing in such things when her mother died. The next 3 days passed in a haze of backbreaking work. Clara cooked, cleaned, mended, and tended the chickens. Silas watched her constantly, making lewd comments and finding excuses to brush against her. Each night she collapsed onto her makeshift bed, exhausted, but grateful he hadn't yet forced the issue of marriage consummation. She knew her reprieve was temporary. On the 4th morning, Silas announced he was riding into Silver Creek to fetch the preacher and supplies. "I'll be back by evening. Don't even think about leaving. I'll track you down, and you won't like what happens when I find you." Clara nodded mutely, and as soon as his figure disappeared over the ridge, she considered running. But where? She had no survival skills, no weapon, no horse. The wilderness would kill her as surely as Silas would. She slumped against the cabin wall, defeated. She was drawing water from the well when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. It was different from Silas's mule, heavier and more rhythmic. Her heart leaped into her throat. Had he returned early? But the rider who crested the hill was not Silas. He was the largest man Clara had ever seen, sitting astride a massive bay horse that looked almost too small beneath him. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. Buckskin clothing stretched across impossibly broad shoulders, long dark hair that fell past his collar, and a thick beard that couldn't hide the strong line of his jaw. His arms were corded with muscle, and even from a distance, he radiated a kind of controlled power that was both intimidating and oddly reassuring. He rode up slowly, his dark eyes taking in the homestead and settling on Clara with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. When he dismounted, he moved with surprising grace for such a large man, his movements economical and purposeful. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a deep rumble, "name's Nathaniel Garrett, looking for Silas Crenshaw. He here?" Clara found her voice after a moment. "He rode into town, won't be back until evening." She studied this Nathaniel Garrett, wondering what business he had with Silas. Mountain man, she thought, recognizing the type from stories she'd heard. Men who lived in the high country, trapping and hunting, coming to civilization only when necessary. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at her more carefully, taking in the purple bruise on her wrist where Silas had grabbed her too roughly 2 days prior, the exhaustion evident in her face, the way she held herself with a strange mixture of dignity and defeat. You his wife?" The question was direct but not unkind. "Not yet," Clara admitted, then wondered why she was being honest with this stranger. "Soon, though, against my will." Something flickered in Nathaniel's expression, a muscle tightening in his jaw. "Against your will." The whole sorry story poured out of her then, perhaps because he was the first person in days who had looked at her like she was human rather than property. She told him about the gambling debt, the trade for a mule and flour, her father's betrayal, and her current predicament. She didn't cry, had no tears left, but her voice shook with suppressed emotion. Nathaniel listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as if weighing something heavy in his mind. "I came here because Silas witnessed something last winter," Nathaniel finally said, his voice low and measured. "Up in the mountains near Copper Ridge. There was a claim dispute between 2 miners. One of them ended up dead, and the law thinks I did it. I didn't, but I was there. And the real killer has friends in high places. Silas saw what really happened, saw the other man, name of Porter, shoot the miner in cold blood. But Silas has been trying to extort me for money to testify on my behalf." Clara's eyes widened. "You are wanted." "Not officially, not yet. But they are building a case, and without Silas's testimony, I will hang for something I didn't do. Porter's brother is a territorial judge. Nathaniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. I came here to convince Silas to tell the truth, though I suspect he will want more money than I can pay. An idea began forming in Clara's mind, desperate and wild, but the only chance she could see. What if there was another way? What if Silas could get something else he wants in exchange for his testimony? Nathaniel looked at her sharply. What do you mean? He wants a wife, or rather, a servant he can call a wife. What if you offered to take me off his hands, tell him I am sick or cursed, or that you know I have family looking for me? Anything to make him want to be rid of me, and in exchange, he tells the truth about what he saw. Ma'am, I can't just take you. Where would you go? Anywhere but here. Clara stepped closer, urgency thrumming through her. Please, I know we are strangers, but I am begging you. Once he marries me, I am trapped. The law won't help me. I will be his property in every sense. But if you intervene now, before the preacher comes, maybe there is a chance. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. I would rather take my chances in the wilderness alone than stay here. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, and Clara could see the conflict playing across his rugged features. He was a man who clearly lived by a code, and whatever that code was, it was warring with itself now. I live in the mountains, he said slowly. It's a hard life, isolated, cold in winter. I trap and hunt, trade pelts twice a year. It's no place for a lady. I am not a lady, Clara said firmly. I am a survivor. I can work. I can learn. I can endure anything except this. Something in her words or her tone decided him. Nathaniel gave a short nod. All right. When Silas returns, I will make him an offer. My silence about some of his less legal activities and my willingness to forget he owes me money for supplies I fronted him last year in exchange for breaking whatever arrangement he has with you and giving his testimony about the shooting. But I won't force you to come with me if you don't want to. I will take you to the next town, somewhere you can make a fresh start. Thank you, Clara breathed, feeling hope kindle in her chest for the first time in days. Thank you. They waited together in the yard, Nathaniel tending to his horse while Clara prepared coffee over an outdoor fire. She learned he was 30 years old, had been living in the mountains for nearly a decade, and rarely came down to the settlements. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. There was a gentleness in how he moved around her, always keeping a respectful distance, that made Clara feel safer than she had in months. When Silas finally returned at dusk, riding his mule with the preacher in tow, his face went through a series of expressions upon seeing Nathaniel: surprise, wariness, then calculating greed. Garrett, didn't expect to see you here. Silas dismounted, his eyes flicking between Nathaniel and Clara. What brings you down from your mountain? We need to talk, Nathaniel said evenly. In private. The preacher, an elderly man with kind eyes named Reverend Harris, looked confused but stayed back as the two men walked out of earshot. Clara watched anxiously, unable to hear their conversation, but reading their body language. Silas's posture was defensive at first, then interested, then animated. Nathaniel remained calm and still, like a mountain itself, immovable and solid. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. Clara saw money change hands at one point, a small pouch that Nathaniel pulled from his saddlebag. Finally, they shook hands, and both men returned to where Clara and the preacher waited. Change of plans, Silas announced, his voice tight with barely concealed annoyance. The wedding's off. Garrett here has convinced me that keeping the girl is more trouble than she is worth. He's taking her off my hands. Reverend Harris looked relieved. That is probably for the best, Silas. This whole arrangement sat poorly with me from the start. Miss, do you go willingly with Mr. Garrett? I do, Clara said quickly, firmly. Then I will take my leave. Silas, I trust you will find a more appropriate way to secure a wife in the future. Marriage is a sacrament, not a business transaction. The Reverend mounted his horse and rode away, leaving the three of them in the gathering darkness. Silas glared at Clara. Get your things and get out. You are his problem now. Clara didn't need to be told twice. She rushed into the cabin, grabbed her canvas bag with her few possessions, and was back outside in less than a minute. Nathaniel was already mounted, and he reached down a massive hand to help her up. She grasped it, feeling the calloused strength there, and swung up behind him on the horse. The saddle was broad enough to accommodate them both, though she had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep her balance. "We have an agreement about the testimony," Nathaniel said to Silas. "You'll ride to the territorial marshal in Billings next week and tell him what you saw. Everything. If you don't, our other arrangement becomes void, and I will personally see to it that everyone knows about those stolen cattle you have been moving." Silas scowled but nodded. "You'll get what you paid for." Without another word, Nathaniel urged his horse forward, and they rode away from the homestead into the night. Clara clung to his broad back, feeling the powerful muscles shift beneath her hands as he guided the horse with expert ease. They rode for over an hour in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic hoofbeats and the night creatures calling to one another. Finally, when the lights of Silver Creek appeared in the distance, Nathaniel slowed the horse to a walk. "There's a boarding house in town run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. She's decent folk. I will set you up there for a spell, give you some money to get started. You can decide what you want to do next." Clara was quiet for a moment, her cheek pressed against his back, breathing in the scent of leather and pine and something uniquely him. "You saved me. I don't have words adequate to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. What your father did, what Silas intended, it was wrong. No woman should be traded like property." "What did you really give him? It was more than just money, wasn't it?" Nathaniel's shoulders tensed slightly. "I gave him enough gold to make it worth his while, and I promised not to tell the authorities about some of his activities. But mostly, I told him that if he didn't let you go, I would make sure his testimony about the shooting was never heard, and that he might have an unfortunate accident on one of his lonely rides home from town. I don't make threats lightly, and he knew it." Clara shivered, but not from fear, from relief, and from something else she didn't want to examine too closely. This man, this stranger, had risked much to help her. "The boarding house sounds nice," she said softly. "But may I ask you something?" "Yes." "You said you live alone in the mountains. Is that by choice or necessity?" "Both, I suppose. I like the solitude. People are complicated. Nature is honest." "Do you ever get lonely?" There was a pause, long enough that Clara thought he might not answer. "Sometimes," he finally admitted. "More often lately." They arrived at the boarding house, a neat two-story structure with lamplight glowing warmly in the windows. Mrs. Meade Patterson was indeed welcoming, a plump woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and shrewd but kind eyes. Nathaniel paid for a month's lodging and left Clara with enough money to buy necessities. "You take care of yourself," he said to Clara, standing in the front parlor with his hat in his hands. In the lamplight, she could see his face more clearly, strong features weathered by sun and wind, with deep-set eyes that held intelligence and a sadness he probably didn't realize was visible. "Will I see you again?" Clara asked, surprised by the disappointment she felt at the thought of him leaving. "I don't come to town often, but I will check on you when I can." He turned to go, then paused. "Clara, you are braver than you know. You will land on your feet." Then he was gone, disappearing into the night. And Clara felt an unexpected ache in her chest. The next weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. Mrs. Patterson put Clara to work helping around the boarding house in exchange for her room and board, which allowed her to keep most of the money Nathaniel had given her. She cleaned rooms, helped with laundry, and assisted with cooking. It was hard work, but honest work, and for the first time in a long while, Clara felt like she had some control over her life. She made friends with the other women in town, Sarah, who worked at the general store, Emma, a schoolteacher, and Margaret, a seamstress. They welcomed her into their circle, asking few questions about her past and accepting her presence with the easy warmth of frontier women who understood that everyone had a story they might not want to share. But despite her new stability, Clara found her thoughts returning again and again to Nathaniel Garrett. She would catch herself remembering the sound of his voice, the solid strength of his back as she held onto him during that ride, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at her. It was foolish, she told herself. He was a mountain man, a loner who had helped her out of basic human decency. Nothing more. Still, she couldn't help but look up every time a tall man entered the general store or listen hopefully whenever hoofbeats sounded on the street. 2 months passed. Autumn came to Montana, painting the hills in shades of gold and crimson. Clara had saved enough money to consider her next steps. She could stay in Silver Creek, continue working at the boarding house, maybe eventually open a small business of her own. It was a good life, better than she dared hope for during those dark days at Silas's homestead. But something was missing. She felt it in the quiet moments before sleep, a restlessness in her soul. Then, on a crisp October morning, he returned. Clara was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when she heard Mrs. Patterson call out, "Clara, dear, you have a visitor." She turned, her heart leaping even before she saw him. Nathaniel stood in the gateway, looking even larger than she remembered, his buckskin clothing replaced by a clean shirt and denims, though he still radiated that same untamed quality. "Nathaniel," she breathed, suddenly aware of how she must look with her hair tied up in a kerchief and her hands red from washing. "Clara." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands in a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to check on you, see how you were getting along." "I am well." "Very well, actually. Come, let me get you some coffee." She led him to the small bench under the cottonwood tree, her hands trembling slightly as she poured from the pot that always sat warming on the outdoor stove. "What brings you to town?" "I came to testify," he said, accepting the cup. "The marshal sent word. Silas kept his promise and gave a full statement about what he saw. They arrested Porter last week, and the trial is set for next month. The charges against me have been dropped." "That's wonderful news." Clara felt genuine happiness for him, mixed with a selfish disappointment that now he had no reason to return to civilization. "It is. I'm a free man, at least in the eyes of the law." He sipped his coffee, his eyes studying her over the rim. "You look good, healthy, happy even." "I am, thanks to you. Mrs. Patterson has been kind, and I've made friends. I have work and purpose. You gave me my life back, Nathaniel. You gave yourself your life back. I just provided an opportunity." He set down his cup. "Clara, I want to be honest with you about something. The reason I didn't come back sooner, even after Silas testified, was because I was trying to stay away, trying to convince myself that what I felt was just concern for someone I helped." Clara's breath caught. "And did you convince yourself?" "No." His dark eyes met hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "The truth is, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, about your courage that day, your strength, the way you fought for your own freedom. I have lived alone for a long time, convinced that was how I wanted it. But these past months, the mountain has felt emptier than ever. And I realized it wasn't the mountain that had changed. It was me." Clara set down her own cup, her hands shaking. "I thought I was going mad," she admitted. "I would see someone who looked like you from behind and my heart would race. I would remember the sound of your voice and lose track of conversations. I told myself it was gratitude, but that was a lie." Nathaniel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his much larger one. His touch was warm and gentle, belying his size. "I don't have much to offer you. My cabin is small and rough. The winters are harsh. You would be isolated miles from the nearest neighbor. It's a hard life for anyone, and especially for a woman used to company and civilization." "I am not used to much of anything anymore," Clara said, her fingers tightening around his. "But I know what I don't want. I don't want to wake up one day and realize I was too afraid to reach for something real. You saved me, Nathaniel, not just from Silas, but from giving up on myself. And if I am honest, I've been waiting these 2 months hoping you would come back. I'm here now, and if you'll have me, I'm not going anywhere without you." "Are you asking me to come live with you in the mountains?" Clara's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I'm asking you to marry me," Nathaniel said, his voice steady and sure. "I know it's fast, and I know I'm not easy to live with. I can be too quiet, too stubborn. The life is hard and lonely sometimes. But I swear to you, Clara Bennett, I will spend every day trying to make you happy. I will protect you with my last breath, provide for you with everything I have, and love you with everything I am. If you will have me." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were tears of joy, of relief, of a happiness so profound it almost hurt. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Nathaniel's face transformed, a smile breaking across his rugged features like sunrise over the mountains, and suddenly Clara understood why this man had haunted her thoughts. He was home, not a place, but a person, a sanctuary in human form. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, and cupped her face in his large hands with infinite tenderness. "May I kiss you?" In answer, Clara rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, two people learning the shape of each other. Then it deepened, becoming something more urgent, more real. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard, and Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this right," he murmured. "Proper wedding, proper vows. You deserve that." They were married 3 days later by Reverend Harris, the same preacher who had nearly married her to Silas. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but the Reverend seemed pleased to be officiating a wedding based on love rather than commerce. Clara wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson helped her make, and Sarah wove wildflowers into her hair. Emma and Margaret stood as witnesses, along with a few of the boarding house residents who had become friends. Nathaniel wore a new shirt and had trimmed his beard, though his long hair still brushed his shoulders. He looked uncomfortable in the church setting, but never took his eyes off Clara as she walked down the short aisle toward him. When she reached his side and took his hand, she felt the slight tremor there and realized he was nervous. This powerful man who faced down bears and survived alone in the wilderness was nervous about marrying her. The realization made her love him even more. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Harris began, and Clara barely heard the words that followed. She was too focused on Nathaniel's eyes, dark and deep and full of promise. When it came time for vows, his voice was strong and clear. "I, Nathaniel Garrett, take you, Clara Bennett, to be my wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, provide for you, and honor you all the days of my life. I will be faithful to you and to you alone. This I swear before God and these witnesses." Clara's voice shook but didn't waver as she spoke her own vows. "I, Clara Bennett, take you, Nathaniel Garrett, to be my wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, stand beside you, and honor you all the days of my life. I will be faithful to you and to you alone. This I swear before God and these witnesses." The Reverend pronounced them man and wife, and when Nathaniel kissed her, there was a rightness to it that Clara had never felt before. This was where she was meant to be. This was who she was meant to be with. The small gathering celebrated with cake and coffee in the boarding house parlor. Mrs. Patterson wept openly, and even taciturn Nathaniel smiled more than Clara had ever seen. As the afternoon wore on, and Clara realized they hadn't discussed what happened next. "When do we leave for the mountains?" she asked as they stood together on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent. "Tomorrow morning, if you are ready. But Clara, I want you to understand what you are agreeing to. It's 3 days' ride from here, the last day through terrain that's barely passable. My cabin is small, 1 room, though I can add on come spring. The nearest neighbors are a day's ride away. In winter we might go months without seeing another soul. If you have doubts, if you need more time—" "I have no doubts," Clara interrupted firmly. "My whole life I felt like I was waiting for something, though I didn't know what. Then I was traded away like I was nothing, and I thought that was my answer, that I was meant for nothing. But then you came along and showed me I was wrong. You saw me as a person, as someone worth saving. And when you look at me, I feel like I matter. Like I have value. I don't need civilization or company or comfort. I need you. So yes, tomorrow morning we leave for the mountains, and I won't look back." Nathaniel pulled her close, wrapping his powerful arms around her, and Clara felt safer than she ever had in her life. "I won't let you regret this," he murmured into her hair. "I know you won't." They spent their wedding night at the boarding house in Clara's small room. Nathaniel was gentle and patient, treating her like she was precious, and Clara discovered that physical intimacy with someone you loved was nothing like the terrifying prospect it had been with Silas. This was beautiful, natural, right? Afterward, as she lay in Nathaniel's arms, listening to his heartbeat beneath her ear, she felt a completeness she had never known existed. The next morning, they packed Clara's few belongings onto Nathaniel's horse and a second pack horse he had purchased. The women of Silver Creek gathered to see them off, pressing gifts into Clara's hands: preserves, a warm shawl, seeds for a garden, a medical kit. Mrs. Patterson hugged her tightly. "You are always welcome here if you need refuge," the older woman whispered. "But I think you have found where you belong." "I think so too," Clara agreed. They set out under a clear autumn sky, riding north into the mountains. The first day was easy traveling, through rolling hills and open country. Nathaniel pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the land, his voice that deep rumble she was coming to love. They camped that night beside a stream, and Nathaniel showed her how to make a proper fire and cook over open flame. Clara was a quick learner, asking questions and paying attention. The second day took them higher into the foothills. The air grew cooler, the vegetation changing from prairie grass to pine forest. They saw deer and elk, and once, in the distance, a bear. Clara tensed, but Nathaniel kept the horses calm and gave the animal a wide berth. "They usually leave you alone if you leave them alone," he explained. "But come spring, when they have cubs, you have to be more careful." That night, under a canopy of stars so bright it seemed like you could reach up and touch them, Nathaniel held Clara close and told her more about his life. How he'd come west after his parents died of cholera in Kansas, seeking a fresh start. How he'd worked as a trapper and hunter, learning the mountains and their secrets. How he'd built his cabin with his own hands, planning it for one, but now grateful it would house two. "I never thought I would marry," he admitted. "Never thought I'd find someone who could understand why I live the way I do. But you, Clara, you're different. You're strong. You don't need the things most people think they need." "I just need you," Clara said simply, and kissed him under the stars. The third day was the hardest. They followed what Nathaniel called a trail, though Clara could barely distinguish it from the surrounding forest. The path climbed steeply, switching back and forth up the mountainside. And the horses picked their way carefully over rocks and fallen logs. Several times Clara's heart was in her throat as they navigated narrow passages with dizzying drops to one side. But Nathaniel was confident and sure, clearly having made this journey hundreds of times. He kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out plants she should know about, teaching her which berries were safe and which were poison, showing her how to read the forest. "This is your home now," he said. "You need to understand it, respect it. The mountain will provide everything we need if we're smart about it." Late in the afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Nathaniel pointed ahead. "There, that's home." Clara looked where he indicated, and saw a valley nestled between peaks with a clear stream running through it. Near the stream stood a cabin, small but solid-looking, with smoke rising from the chimney. "Wait, smoke? Did you leave a fire burning?" Clara asked. Nathaniel frowned. "No, someone's there." He urged the horse forward faster, his body tense, and Clara held on tight. As they approached the cabin, a figure emerged, and Nathaniel relaxed. "Caleb," he called out. The man, lean and weathered with gray streaking his dark hair, waved. "About time you got back, Nate. Came up to check on the place and found some varmints had gotten into your stores. Chased them off and patched the hole. Hope you don't mind I started a fire. Gets cold up here, even in October." "I'm grateful," Nathaniel said, dismounting and helping Clara down. "Caleb, this is Clara, my wife. Clara, this is Caleb Stone. My nearest neighbor and the closest thing I have to a friend." Caleb's eyebrows shot up. "Wife? Well, I'll be. Congratulations to you both." He shook Clara's hand with a grip that was firm but not crushing. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. This old hermit finally found someone willing to put up with him." "The pleasure is mine," Clara said, liking Caleb immediately. He had kind eyes and an easy smile. Caleb stayed for supper, regaling Clara with stories about Nathaniel that made her husband shake his head in mock exasperation. Then, as dusk settled over the valley, he took his leave. "I will check in come spring," he said, mounting his horse. "And Clara, if you ever need anything and this lug is not around, my place is due east about 6 hours' ride. Just follow the stream to where it splits, then take the left fork." "Thank you, Caleb. It's good to know we have a friend nearby." After he left, Nathaniel and Clara stood together in the doorway of the cabin, watching the last light fade from the sky. The valley was beautiful, wild, and untamed, and Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. "Welcome home," Nathaniel said softly. Clara turned to look at the cabin properly. It was indeed small, perhaps 15 feet square, with a stone fireplace at one end and a bed frame built into the corner. There was a table with 2 chairs, some rough shelving, and pegs on the wall for hanging things. A bearskin rug covered part of the wooden floor, and the whole space was illuminated by firelight. "It's perfect," Clara said, and meant it. That night, in the bed that was now theirs, with the fire crackling and the sound of the stream outside, Clara felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. She had been traded for a mule and a bag of flour, treated as worthless, and yet here she was, in the arms of a man who loved her, starting a new life in the wilderness. Life was strange and beautiful and full of unexpected turns. The weeks that followed were an education in mountain living. Nathaniel was a patient teacher, showing Clara how to hunt small game, how to fish in the stream, how to preserve meat and vegetables for the long winter ahead. She learned to identify animal tracks, to read the weather by the behavior of birds, to navigate by landmarks and the position of the sun. The work was hard, constant, but Clara thrived on it. She felt herself growing stronger, more capable. Her hands grew calloused from hauling water and chopping wood. Her legs grew muscled from climbing the steep trails around their valley. She was becoming a woman of the mountains, and she loved it. Nathaniel watched her transformation with quiet pride. He had worried she might regret her choice, might find the isolation and hardship too much. But Clara proved herself again and again. She never complained, never sulked, never looked back. Instead, she threw herself into their life with enthusiasm and determination. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk for hours. Clara learned about Nathaniel's childhood, his dreams, his fears. He learned about her mother's kindness, her father's descent into self-destruction, her hopes for the future. They shared stories and dreams and slowly, steadily, not built a foundation of understanding and trust that went deeper than passion. The physical side of their marriage deepened too. Nathaniel was always gentle but increasingly confident, and Clara discovered a passion in herself she hadn't known existed. In the privacy of their mountain home, they could be completely themselves with each other, vulnerable and open in ways that civilization never allowed. Winter came early to the high country. The first snows fell in mid-November, and by December the valley was blanketed in white. Nathaniel had prepared well, and they had ample supplies: dried meat, beans, flour, cornmeal, preserves. The cabin was snug, the walls well chinked against the cold. They spent long days inside while blizzards raged outside, reading from the few books they had, telling stories, making love, simply being together. Clara learned to appreciate the beauty of winter in the mountains. On clear days, when the sun sparkled on the snow and the sky was so blue it hurt to look at, she would bundle up and explore the area around the cabin. Nathaniel taught her to snowshoe, and they would trek through the silent white landscape together, hand in hand. In late December, they celebrated Christmas with a simple meal and gifts they had made for each other. Nathaniel had carved Clara a beautiful wooden jewelry box with her name on it. Clara had made him a warm shirt from soft buckskin she'd spent weeks preparing and stitching. They exchanged gifts by firelight, and Nathaniel pulled her into his lap, kissing her thoroughly. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," he murmured against her lips. "Mine too," Clara agreed, and it was. No fancy presents or big celebration could compare to this simple joy of being together. January and February were brutal, with temperatures dropping so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. They burned through wood at an alarming rate, and several times Nathaniel had to bundle up and dig through snowdrifts to reach the woodpile. But the cabin stayed warm, and they stayed close. During one particularly fierce storm, Clara woke in the night to find Nathaniel sitting up, staring at the fire. She touched his shoulder. "What's wrong?" "Just thinking," he said quietly, "about how different my life is now. A year ago, I was alone up here, and I told myself I was content. But now with you here, I realize I was just surviving. Now I'm living." Clara wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek to his broad back. "I feel the same way. You saved me, Nathaniel. In every way a person can be saved. He turned, pulling her around to face him, his eyes serious. "You saved me too, Clara. Maybe we saved each other." They made love then, slow and tender, and afterward Clara lay in his arms and watched the fire cast dancing shadows on the ceiling. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that terrible day outside Murphy's General Store to this moment of perfect happiness. It had been painful and frightening, but she wouldn't change it now, because it had led her to Nathaniel. Spring came in March with a rush of melting snow and surging streams. The valley transformed, green pushing up through the brown, wildflowers blooming in impossible profusion. Birds returned, their songs filling the air. Clara threw herself into planting a garden, working the earth that Nathaniel had fenced off near the cabin. She planted seeds the women of Silver Creek had given her, beans, squash, carrots, turnips, herbs. Nathaniel added onto the cabin as he had promised, building a second room that would serve as a pantry and storage area. The sound of his hammer and saw was a constant music during those long spring days. Clara would bring him water and watch him work, admiring the play of muscles under his shirt, the sure confidence of his movements. He was magnificent, her mountain man, and he was hers. In late April, Caleb returned for a visit, bringing news from the settlements. Porter had been convicted of murder and sentenced to hang. The territorial judge, his brother, had been removed from the bench for corruption. Silas Crenshaw had left Montana Territory, rumor said headed for California. Clara's father had drunk himself to death over the winter. That last piece of news hit Clara hard. Despite everything, he had been her father, and she grieved the man he had been before whiskey destroyed him. Nathaniel held her while she cried, offering no platitudes, just his solid presence. "He made his choices," Clara said when the tears finally stopped. "And I made mine. I choose to remember the good parts before Mother died, when he was kind." "That's wise," Nathaniel agreed. "We can't change the past, only how we carry it forward." Caleb stayed for 3 days, helping Nathaniel with some of the heavier work and entertaining them with stories. Before he left, he pulled Clara aside. "I've known Nate for near 5 years," he said. "Never seen him happy. Not really. Satisfied, maybe, content, but not happy. You have changed that. He smiles now, did you know that? Actual smiles. You are good for him, Clara." "He is good for me, too," Clara said. "We are good for each other." Summer in the mountains was glorious. The garden flourished under Clara's care, and she spent hours tending it, weeding and watering. She learned to fish from Nathaniel and became quite good at it, often bringing home strings of trout for their supper. They took long walks through the high meadows, picking berries and herbs, simply enjoying the warm weather and each other's company. In July, Clara realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. At first, she attributed it to the change in lifestyle, the different diet, the physical exertion. But when her breasts became tender and she found herself overwhelmingly fatigued in the afternoons, she knew. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with joy and fear in equal measure. A baby. She and Nathaniel were going to have a baby, but she was miles from any doctor, any midwife. What if something went wrong? She told Nathaniel that evening as they sat by the fire. He was whittling a new handle for an axe and she was mending a shirt. The domestic scene gave her courage. "Nathaniel, I need to tell you something." He looked up, immediately attentive to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it?" "I think I am pregnant. I'm fairly certain, actually." Nathaniel's eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features. "A baby? And we're going to have a baby?" "Yes," Clara said, her own smile breaking through. "I think so. I'm scared, Nathaniel. We are so far from help." He was across the room in 2 strides, pulling her up into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "Don't be scared. We will figure this out. When the time comes, we will go down to Silver Creek if you want, or we will bring a midwife up here. Whatever you need, whatever makes you feel safe." "I feel safe with you," Clara said, and it was true. With Nathaniel beside her, she could face anything. The pregnancy progressed well. Clara had some morning sickness in the early months, but it passed quickly. She continued her daily routines, though Nathaniel became almost comically protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or climb too far. Clara found it endearing even when it was annoying. In August, they made the 3-day journey down to Silver Creek so Clara could be examined by the doctor and stock up on supplies. The town was surprised but delighted to see them, and the women fussed over Clara's pregnancy with enthusiasm. Mrs. Patterson declared herself an honorary grandmother and pressed a stack of baby clothes into Clara's hands. The doctor pronounced Clara and the baby healthy and estimated the birth would be in late February or early March. "I can't come up to your mountains," he admitted, "but I know a midwife who might be willing. Name's Hannah Pritchard. Lives about a day's ride from Silver Creek in the other direction. I will give you her information." They met with Hannah, a capable woman in her 40s who had delivered hundreds of babies. But she agreed to come to their cabin when the time was near, if they sent word with enough advance notice. She also gave Clara detailed instructions on what to expect and what to prepare. Armed with knowledge and supplies, Clara felt much better about the coming birth. They returned to their valley in early September, and Clara spent the fall preparing. She sewed tiny clothes, gathered soft furs and blankets for the baby, and transformed a corner of the cabin into a nursery area. Nathaniel built a beautiful wooden cradle, sanding it smooth and carving little animals on the sides: a deer, a bear, an eagle, a rabbit. As Clara's belly swelled, she found herself even more in love with Nathaniel, if that were possible. He was attentive and tender, constantly asking how she felt, what she needed. At night, he would lie with his head on her stomach, talking to their unborn child, telling stories about the mountains, singing old songs in his deep voice. Clara would run her fingers through his long hair and feel so full of love she thought she might burst. Winter came again, and this time Clara was largely confined to the cabin by her advancing pregnancy. She didn't mind. She spent the short days keeping their home, preparing meals and dreaming about the baby. Would it be a boy or a girl? Would it have Nathaniel's dark eyes or her lighter ones? Would it be strong and healthy? In late February, Clara woke one morning to a familiar tightening in her belly. She lay still, counting, and when it came again 20 minutes later, she knew. Today was the day. "Nathaniel," she said, shaking him awake. "It's time." "The baby is coming." Nathaniel was on his feet instantly, suddenly looking terrified in a way she'd never seen. "Now? Right now? Should I go get Hannah? How far apart are the pains?" "They just started. 20 minutes apart. We have time, but yes, you should go get Hannah. And Nathaniel, breathe. We are going to be fine." He dressed in record time, kissed her hard, and was out the door. Clara heard him saddling his horse, and the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. She was alone. The contractions continued, gradually getting closer together. Clara kept herself busy, stoking the fire, boiling water, laying out the supplies Hannah had told her to prepare. She walked around the cabin when the pain allowed, timing the contractions as she'd been instructed. By evening, the contractions were 5 minutes apart, and Clara was beginning to worry. Where was Nathaniel? It had been nearly 10 hours. Had something happened? But then she heard horses, and relief flooded through her. Nathaniel burst through the door with Hannah right behind him. The midwife took one look at Clara and went into efficient action, setting up her supplies and examining Clara with practiced hands. "You are doing well," Hannah pronounced. "Still got some time yet, but the baby is positioned right. This should be straightforward." It wasn't straightforward, not really. Labor was harder and longer and more painful than Clara had imagined, but Hannah was competent and calm, guiding her through each contraction, telling her when to push and when to rest. And Nathaniel was there, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. "You're so strong," he told her. "So brave. I love you so much, Clara. You can do this." And she did. In the early hours of March 1st, 1877, after nearly 18 hours of labor, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. His first cry filled the cabin, and Clara wept with joy and relief and exhaustion. Hannah cleaned the baby and placed him on Clara's chest. "Congratulations, you two. You have a fine son." Clara looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her child, his eyes scrunched shut, his little mouth working, and felt love so overwhelming it was almost painful. She looked up at Nathaniel, who was staring at their son with wonder written all over his face. "We have a son," Clara whispered. "We have a son," Nathaniel echoed. He reached out a finger and the baby's tiny hand wrapped around it reflexively. Nathaniel's eyes filled with tears. "Hello, little one. I'm your papa." They named him Jacob, after Nathaniel's father. Jacob Garrett came into the world healthy and strong, with a good set of lungs that he used often those first few weeks. Hannah stayed for 4 days, making sure Clara was recovering well and teaching her how to nurse and care for the baby. Then she returned to her home, leaving instructions to send for her if any problems arose. The first months of Jacob's life were exhausting. Clara had never been so tired, waking every few hours to nurse him, changing countless diapers, soothing him when he fussed. But she had never been so happy either. And Nathaniel was an involved father, walking Jacob around the cabin when he was fussy, singing to him, changing diapers without complaint. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Nathaniel admitted one night, he holding Jacob while Clara caught a few hours of sleep. "I thought what I felt for you was the limit, but this little one, he's a part of both of us. It's almost too much to hold inside." As Jacob grew, Clara saw Nathaniel in him, the dark eyes, the strong jaw, the large hands that would someday be as capable as his father's. But he had her smile and her lighter hair color, a perfect blend of them both. Spring came again, and life took on a new rhythm. Clara worked with Jacob strapped to her back in a carrier Nathaniel had fashioned. The baby seemed to love being outside, cooing at the birds and the breeze. The garden flourished, the chickens Nathaniel had acquired laid eggs faithfully, and their little family thrived. Caleb visited in June and was completely charmed by Jacob. "Boy, he's going to be a heartbreaker when he grows up," the older man declared, making silly faces that had the baby laughing. Summer passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. Jacob began sitting up, then crawling, exploring his world with determined curiosity. Nathaniel baby-proofed the cabin as best he could, and Clara found herself constantly chasing after their active son. In the fall, as Jacob approached 8 months old, Clara realized she was pregnant again. This time, she wasn't as frightened, knowing what to expect. When she told Nathaniel, he grinned and pulled her into a gentle embrace, mindful of Jacob crawling at their feet. "Our family is growing," he said, wonder in his voice. "I never imagined my life would be like this." "Is it what you want?" Clara asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know you were alone for so long. Are you happy?" "Clara, I've never been happier. You and Jacob, and now another baby on the way. You are everything I didn't know I needed. You are my heart." The second pregnancy was easier in some ways, harder in others. Clara knew what to expect, but she was also chasing after an active toddler. Jacob was walking by his first birthday, getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of a mountain child. Nathaniel added onto the cabin again, creating a second small bedroom for the children. This baby came in early June of 1878, another son they named Samuel after Clara's grandfather. The birth was faster and easier than Jacob's, lasting only 8 hours. Hannah was there again, and this time Caleb had come as well, keeping Jacob entertained while Clara labored. Samuel was different from Jacob from the start, quieter, more contemplative, with Clara's blue eyes and a calm disposition. Jacob was fascinated by his baby brother, wanting to touch him and help care for him. Clara had to teach him to be gentle, but she loved watching the bond form between her sons. Life with 2 young children was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Clara sometimes thought back to that girl who had been traded for a mule and a bag of flour and marveled at how far she'd come. That frightened, hopeless young woman had become a confident wife and mother, at home in the wilderness, strong and capable. Nathaniel was an incredible father. Despite his size and strength, he was endlessly patient with the boys, teaching them about the mountains, playing with them, telling them stories. Clara would watch him with Jacob and Samuel and fall in love with him all over again. You are staring," Nathaniel said one evening, catching her watching as he showed 3-year-old Jacob how to whittle. "I'm appreciating," Clara corrected, nursing Samuel. "I'm appreciating how blessed I am." Years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children. Jacob grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence. Samuel remained gentler, more interested in books and learning than hunting and trapping. Nathaniel encouraged both boys to be themselves, never forcing them into molds. In 1881, Clara gave birth to their only daughter, a tiny thing with Clara's features and Nathaniel's dark hair. They named her Emma Rose, and she had all three males wrapped around her little finger from day one. Jacob and Samuel were protective of their baby sister, and Nathaniel was helplessly in love. She has me completely undone," Nathaniel admitted, rocking Emma while Clara rested. "How can something so small have so much power?" "Welcome to having a daughter," Clara said with a smile. The cabin had grown over the years, now a proper house with 3 bedrooms, a separate kitchen area, and a storage room. Nathaniel had built a barn for their animals, chickens, a milk cow, and several horses. The garden was extensive, providing most of their vegetables. They were largely self-sufficient, going to Silver Creek only twice a year for supplies and to sell pelts. Jacob was 14 in 1890, already standing 6 feet tall and showing signs of matching his father's build. Oriri Samuel was 12, bookish and thoughtful, dreaming of perhaps becoming a teacher one day. Emma was 9, was a spirited girl who could ride as well as her brothers and wasn't afraid of anything. Clara was 41, her dark hair showing threads of gray, her face lined by sun and wind, but still beautiful. Nathaniel was 49, his beard now more gray than brown, his body still strong, though he moved a bit more carefully than he once had. They had been married 14 years, and their love had only deepened. One evening in late summer, with all the children asleep, Nathaniel and Clara sat on the porch they'd built, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. It was a ritual they tried to maintain whenever possible, this quiet time together. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathaniel asked suddenly. "Giving up civilization, living up here?" "Never," Clara said firmly, taking his hand. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be. You gave me freedom when I needed it most. But more than that, you gave me love, a home, a family. You gave me a life worth living." "You gave me the same," Nathaniel said. "That day I rode up to Silas's place, I was just trying to save my own skin, get his testimony. I had no idea I was going to find the other half of my soul." "I was traded for a mule and a bag of flour," Clara said softly, "treated like I was worthless. But you traded your silence for my freedom. You gave up your safety to save mine. That's when I knew you were different from any man I'd ever met." "I would do it again in a heartbeat," Nathaniel assured her, 1,000 times over. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Clara spoke again. "Do you remember what you said to me right before we got married? You said maybe we saved each other." "I remember. You were right. We did save each other. And we have built something beautiful together." Nathaniel stood, pulling Clara to her feet and into his arms. Even after 14 years, 3 children, and countless hardships, he still made her heart race. She looked up into his weathered face and saw the same love shining there that she'd seen on their wedding day. "I love you, Clara Garrett," he said. "I love you, Nathaniel Garrett," she replied. They kissed under the stars, surrounded by the mountains that had become their home, their sanctuary. Inside, their children slept safely. The future stretched ahead, full of unknown challenges and joys. But whatever came, they would face it together, the mountain man and the woman he'd saved, who had saved him in return. Their love story had begun with a tragedy, with Clara being traded away like property. But Nathaniel had seen her worth when no one else had. He had traded his silence, his safety, his solitude for her freedom. And in doing so, he had found his own freedom, his own happiness. Years continued to pass, each season bringing its own rhythms. Jacob eventually married a young woman from Silver Creek, a kind girl named Mary, who took to mountain life with surprising ease. They built their own cabin a few miles away, starting their own family. Samuel, true to his nature, moved to Helena to attend school and become a teacher, though he visited every summer. Emma married at 21 to a rancher named Thomas, and they settled in a valley not far from Caleb's old place. Nathaniel and Clara became grandparents, delighting in the visits from their growing family. The cabin that had once housed just one lonely man now rang with laughter whenever the family gathered. As they entered their 60s, Nathaniel and Clara slowed down somewhat, but never stopped working. The mountain was still their home, still their sanctuary. They walked the familiar trails hand in hand, remembering the years they'd spent building their life together. On a crisp autumn day in 1898, With leaves turning gold and the air sharp with the promise of winter, Clara and Nathaniel sat on their porch watching the sunset behind the mountains. They were older now, gray-haired and lined, but still deeply in love. 22 years, Clara mused. Can you believe it's been 22 years since you rode up to Silas's place? Best decision I ever made, Nathaniel said. Well, the second best? Best was asking you to marry me. I would have followed you anywhere, Clara admitted, even if you hadn't asked me to marry you. I was that desperate, that drawn to you. I'm glad I asked properly, though. You deserve to be courted, to be wooed, to be loved the right way. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength still there despite the years. You have loved me the right way every single day since. You made me feel valuable when I thought I was worth nothing. You gave me a home when I was homeless. You gave me family when I'd lost everything. And you gave me purpose, Nathaniel replied. A reason to be more than just a man surviving in the wilderness. You gave me love, children, a real life. I was existing before you. Now I'm living. As the sun finally dipped below the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat together in the peaceful silence that only comes from decades of companionship. Their story had begun with injustice and desperation, but it had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. Clara thought about the young woman she'd been, standing on that dusty street in Silver Creek, hearing her father trade her away. That girl had been broken, hopeless, convinced her life was over. She could never have imagined that her darkest moment would lead to her greatest joy. And Nathaniel, the lonely mountain man who had come down seeking justice, had found something far more valuable: love, family, belonging. They had built a legacy together, not just in the children and grandchildren who carried on their name, but in the love story they'd created. A story of redemption and second chances, of finding light in darkness, of two broken people making each other whole. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Nathaniel helped Clara to her feet. Come on, love, let's go inside where it's warm. They walked into their cabin together, closing the door on another perfect day in their mountain paradise. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, but they would face it together, as they had faced everything for over 2 decades. In the years that followed, they continued their life in the mountains, slowing down gradually, but never losing the love that had sustained them through everything. When Nathaniel passed away peacefully in his sleep at 71, Clara grieved deeply, but took comfort in knowing they'd had 34 years together, every one of them precious. She stayed in the mountain cabin for another 5 years, tended by her devoted children, before joining Nathaniel in the small cemetery they'd established on a hill overlooking their valley. They were buried side by side under a large pine tree with a simple marker that read, Nathaniel and Clara Garrett. They saved each other. Their children and grandchildren continued to tell their story of how Clara was traded for a mule and a bag of flour, and how a mountain man named Nathaniel traded his silence for her freedom. But more importantly, they told of the great love that grew from that transaction, a love that produced a family and a legacy that endured for generations. It was a story of the Wild West, of hardship and survival, but most of all, it was a love story. A reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, even when treated as worthless, there is always hope, always the possibility of redemption, always the chance for love to transform everything. And in the mountains of Montana, where the wind whispers through the pines and the streams run clear and cold, the spirit of their love story lives on, inspiring all who hear it to believe in second chances, to see the value in every person, and to understand that true love can flourish anywhere, even in the wildest and most unexpected places. The cabin still stands, maintained by the family as a testament to where it all began. Visitors who make the long journey up the mountain can see the cradle Nathaniel carved for Jacob, the rocking chair where Clara nursed her babies, the porch where they watched countless sunsets together. And if you listen carefully on a quiet evening, some say you can almost hear the echo of their love in the mountain breeze, a reminder that the greatest treasures are often found not in gold or possessions, but in the hearts of those who love us. Clara and Nathaniel's story was one of transformation, of two wounded souls finding healing in each other. She was traded away like property, but he saw her humanity, her worth, her strength. He was isolated and alone, but she saw his kindness, his integrity, his capacity for love. Together, they built something that transcended their individual pasts and created a future full of love, family, and purpose. Their legacy lived on not just in their descendants, but in the example they set, proving that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that courage can be found in the darkest moments, and that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead directly to the best things in our lives. In Silver Creek, their story became legend, told and retold with growing embellishment over the years. But those who knew them, who saw the way they looked at each other even after decades of marriage, understood that the reality was more beautiful than any embellishment could make it. They were simply two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, who chose to build a life together despite the odds, and who loved each other faithfully until death parted them. And in the end, isn't that what every great love story is about? Finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, and choosing to walk through life together, whatever may come. The mountains of Montana keep their secrets well. But the story of Clara and Nathaniel Garrett is one that refuses to be forgotten. It echoes through the valleys and peaks, a testament to the enduring power of love, the importance of seeing value in every human being, and the truth that sometimes the greatest loves begin in the most unexpected ways. She was traded for a mule and a bag of flour, but she found a love worth more than all the gold in Montana. He traded his silence for her freedom, but he gained a family and a love that gave his life meaning beyond anything he'd imagined. Together, they proved that from the ashes of despair can rise the most beautiful of phoenixes, true, lasting, transformative love. And so their story ends, not with tragedy or loss, but with fulfillment, with a life well lived, with love that endured and multiplied and continues to inspire. They rest now in the mountain soil they loved, together in death as they were in life, their story complete, their love eternal. The end of their earthly journey, but the beginning of their legend, a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, nurtured in the mountains, and destined to be remembered as long as stories of true love are told. They saved each other, loved each other, built a life together, and left behind a legacy of hope and redemption that continues to inspire all who hear their tale. This is the story of Clara and Nathaniel Garrett, a love story born from injustice but blossoming into something pure and true and lasting. A reminder that we are never defined by how others value us, but by how we choose to live, who we choose to love, and the legacy we build through our choices. They chose love, chose each other. They chose to see the best in one another, and in doing so, created something beautiful that time could never diminish. Their story, like all great love stories, is both unique to them and universal in its themes. We all seek to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. Clara and Nathaniel found all of that in each other, and their love became the foundation for a family, a legacy, and a story that continues to touch hearts more than a century after it began. In the Wild West, where life was hard and justice was often harsh, they found softness in each other, created sanctuary in their mountain home, and proved that love can not only survive but thrive in even the most challenging circumstances. Their love was tested by isolation, by hardship, by the demands of frontier life, and it emerged stronger each time, refined like gold in fire, even becoming more precious with each passing year. So remember their names, Clara and Nathaniel Garrett. Remember that she was traded for a mule and a bag of flour, that he traded his silence for her freedom, and that from this transaction came a love story that would last a lifetime and beyond. Remember that second chances exist, that love can be found in unexpected places, and that the value of a person is never determined by how others treat them, but by the inherent worth that exists in every human soul. This is their story, complete and whole, a testament to love's power to transform, to heal, to redeem. And as long as the mountains stand and the wind whispers through the pines, their love story will endure, inspiring others to believe in the possibility of finding their own great love, their own second chance. their own happily ever after in this wild, beautiful, unpredictable journey we call life.